Hey everybody, and welcome back to Ork Miniatures. If you caught our last video, you saw us paint a Bad Moon's Ork, perfect for a tabletop-ready Grimdark Mini. But today we're taking things up a notch, and diving into the details of the Bad Moon's Warboss and Mega Armor, one of the centerpieces for any Ork army. In this tutorial, we'll guide you through each step to bring out the vibrant yellow that defines the Bad Moon's clan, as well as creating a forest green skin that will make the Warboss stand out on the battlefield. Whether you're aiming for a display piece or just want to up your painting game, we've got you covered. Same as the previous videos, we're working with quick techniques that deliver a great result. Today, this paint job took about 4 hours, a little more than our previous orks, but for a character model, it's definitely worth it. So grab your brushes and paints, and let's get started on turning this Warboss into a true leader of the Bad Moons. And for our skin, we're going to start out with the Citadel's Castellan Green. Creates a really nice deep green base tone, then following up with Citadel's Bugman Glow for all the little bits of exposed skin as well as the lips. Similar as before, in the last tutorial we did, we are going to do a Moody Mauve speed paint mixed with speed paint medium, about a 1:4 ratio, targeting the deepest recesses as well as the undersides of each muscle. And with our muscle groups defined with the wash, we're going to go ahead and move into highlighting. So the first step is going to be Citadel's Castellan Green mixed with Flayed One Flesh, about a 3:1 ratio. You just want to water it down just a little bit, and we're slowly going to be working up in larger increments to work on a easy volumetric highlight. More complex term, but at the end of the day, it just means highlight where the light's touching. So we want to create a nice subtle gradient that goes from darkest to lightest, and where it makes sense really, because at the end of the day, we're going for a more realistic look. We already have that with our flesh tone and the warmth in the skin. Now we're moving into the more brightness, desaturated colors to give it a more realistic whole world appearance. Next, we're going to move into the same mix, but this time just a 2:1 mix, and then followed up by a 1:1 mix of Castellan Green and Flayed One Flesh, each time targeting just a little bit less of each muscle grouping. Realistically, we're wanting to just slowly work up, I would say in about 20% increments, where the first time we're doing about 80% of the muscles, then the next 60%, the next probably about 40, 30%, and so on and so forth. Before we finally reach our highest peak, really just targeting the top bits of each muscle, the little hard lines, and particularly the face, because we really want that to stand out for us. For the final steps of our skin, we're going to go ahead and just use pure Flayed One Flesh. This is just going to be on the tips, anywhere there are hard defined lines, as well as just a couple little dot highlights just scattered around on the muscle groups, as well as on the little bits of arm flap and lips. Now, as you probably realized, this isn't the official Games Workshop sculpt of the Warboss and Mega Armor. We're actually using a 3D print from Mezgike Miniatures. It does great orks all the way around. I've used a ton of them, and they all look great. Now with our skin done, we're going to move into the Bad Moon's yellow armor. To do this, we're going to start off with Averland Sunset. For those of you that watched our last video, this is going to look very similar. We're just going to add a couple additional steps to just kind of brighten it up just a little bit more, as well as darken up the recesses just a bit. We're going to move into the purple details, so the base tone for that is going to be Xarius Purple, also a Citadel paint. Nice mid-tone purple. It weathers up really nicely, blends in with the yellow details quite well. For the little details on the little badges, we're going to move into Gracier, and as well as do a small checkerboard pattern on the front left knee pad. And with our base tones done, we're going to move into shading the yellows and the purples. And to do this, we're going to start with Army Painter Fire Drake Speed Paint mixed with Speed Paint Medium, about 1:4. For this, we're just wanting to use it more as an ink than anything, and just use it to shade all of our different yellow details, targeting the lower about 2/3 of each yellow panel. Next up, the shading is going to be Army Painter Burnished Red mixed with Speed Paint Medium. Once again, about a 1:4 ratio. For this, we're going to be targeting the deepest recesses, as well as around rivets, on hard edges where a lot of light is going to get blocked up from different angles. Now with our shading done, we are going to go back in with some Averland Sunset, clean up a little spots where we got a little bit too much of the actual shade paint, and just bring up a little bit of the brightness back to the model. Now to begin our highlighting for the yellow armor, we're going to do Citadel's Flash Gets Yellow. Just going to do a little bit of edge highlighting here, catch the most raised edges, as well as do a little bit of shading, just furthering that bright yellow on the flat surfaces. To do edge highlighting, I like to mix in about 50-50 water to paint, just to make it to where it flows off the brush nicely. I like to dab off a little bit of excess just on a paper towel next to me, and then just go right in so that you get nice fine lines. For this, it doesn't quite matter as much, just because it's an orc. Nice and scratchy lines, they're going to look just the same. If you have a little bit of overflow on the sides, it's not going to look a difference. For the first highlight for our purple details, we're going to do Gene Stealer Purple. Same deal, we're just going to edge highlight the top little bits of the edges. If it spills over a little bit onto the actual purple detail, which it does here, perfectly fine. For this, gives it more of a defined edge. Going to move into our top highlight for our yellow details in Dorn Yellow. Use this out of a sponge, similar to the way that we do drab brushing. Go into a little bit more detail about it on the last couple of videos if you're interested. And then before we move into edge highlighting. For this, just hit your top most raised areas that you really want to be pronounced. I would just keep this pretty limited as the Dorn Yellow is very bright. We're going to hit our top highlight of the Dracala Lilac now. Similar details, similar way we're doing it. So you take your sponge, just do a little bit of dabbing on our pink and purple details, just gives it a lot of texture before we move into a light edge highlight with it. As we move into the more mundane details, I figured this was a good opportunity to give a little bit of background information about myself and the hobby. So when I was a kid, I would go over to my grandparents a lot while my parents were at work, and my grandfather was really into model planes and model trains. He would do all the painting, he would do all the modeling himself, so while I was there, he would take a lot of the time to show me all his different tips and techniques. So I learned, just general brush techniques, airbrushing, highlighting, dry brushing, all the good stuff, and that really taught me a lot about this hobby. Ended up taking a lot of time off just through middle school, high school, college, until COVID hit, and I finally had some adult money of my own, so I ended up getting back into the hobby through 3D printing. Once I did that, it took about a year to figure out and rehome the skills before I moved into doing Warhammer, D&D miniatures, that sort of thing, and here we are a couple of years after that. Alright, that's enough about me. Y'all are here to see a cool model. So now we're highlighting the kind of fur bits as well as the other details that are steel leech and drab. First layer is going to be Xandri dust, and then followed up by a top highlight of Citadel's Screaming Skull. Just targeting the top details, just do a little bit of dot highlights, a thin line on each of the bits of fur just to further define them. And we're also going to focus on all the bone details. It's going to be the horns and the little skull at his feet. For the Abaddon Black, we're going to use all of his leather details. It's going to be like the little belt on his waist. Before we move into our metallics. So there's a ton of metallics on this model. This was actually the bulk of the paint time for this guy. It took me about 45 minutes to just base coat everything on here. It took forever. So we're going to start off with our Pro Acryl's Dark Silver paint. The reason I like Pro Acryl, a lot of time it covers really finely in one coat. Pretty opaque at the end of the day. And besides that, it flows off the brush really nicely. It doesn't interact the same way the Citadel paints do with water, in that it's nice and creamy, it still covers in one go, and it's easy to actually flow off the brush. To break up our metallics, we're going to use a little bit of copper in there, just for a couple of little stovepipes, as well as just various details. And we're also going to use a light bronze from Pro Acryl for the axe handle, as well as a couple other little various details. Now with the base coating out of the way, about 45 minutes later, like I said, we're going to go ahead and move into Pro Acryl Silver. For this, we're going to use on the pneumatics, on the different components of the model that are not really going to be collecting a bunch of rust, and are going to be in constant motion and thus stay shiny for a very long time. We're going to use a Mechanicus Standard Gray for the various pipings and little cables that are underneath and kind of hidden away. Biggest reason is we need some sort of color on them, but these are out of sight, out of mind. As we move into a Xerius Purple, for this we're going to be using this on the blade of the axe to create a little bit of contrast, a little bit of definition, as well as bring a little bit of that purple color reminiscent of the last Bad Moon's knob we just did, of the purple on the weapon. So to do this, we're going to use a dry brush and a lot of stippling, as well as just a very light dry brush over the top to get a nice uneven base coat, a little bit of texture. Before we move into Cacophony Purple, slightly lighter purple, once again doing a little bit of light dry brushing and stippling. And for the top highlight on this, a T'Challa Lilac out of a sponge. Same deal with the sponge. Using this, it gives us a ton of texture, a lot of definition of the things, while not being as consistent and samey as a dry brush. And we're going to do a little checkerboard on here. Bring back in our metallics, so we're going to use that Pro Acryl Dark Silver. Just do a really thin line. I would water it down about 50-50, or a little bit more even, of water to paint, and then just do light lines. And remember, you can always come back here and resketch, kind of refix all the different bits. As we move into a Citadel Nuln Oil wash. Nuln Oil, infamous, it's great. It is a fantastic wash. Just gonna go ahead and hit all of our metallics, specifically kind of like the lower bits of them, as well as our purple details on the axe, just to kind of blend it in a little bit better. Also gonna hit the pants, the belts, all the various little details on our guy. And to continue our shading, we're going to use Citadel's Skeleton Horde Contrast Paint to shade our bone details as well as our tan bits. Just use this really sparingly, targeting the kind of like just the divots in this bone. Don't need to use a whole lot, and then just remember to always pull the brush towards the deepest recesses, wherever you want the majority of the actual paint to be deposited. Now we're going to go ahead and hit everything, all of our metallics and our armor, with a Pro Acryl dry brush style out of it. Just a really nasty old brush, just gives it a nice scratchy highlight. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of an OSL, very, very basic. Looks alright, and its biggest thing is it's really quick and effective. So to do this, we're going to hit our glowing bits with a Citadel White Scar paint, just whatever the brightest, whitest paint you have is. For this, we're doing a blue glow, so we're going to take our contrast Aethermetic Blue and just do a very light wash over all of the kind of like white details here. Now for the areas around where the sparks are hitting, we don't want it to be the same bright Aethermatic Blue as the rest of it. So we're going to use Army Painter's Caribbean Ocean mixed with Speed Paint Medium, about 1:2 ratio for this. Don't want it quite as watery. And we're just going to use this around the actual contact points, just to give it a little bit of a darker blue, to where it doesn't look like quite like the light is as bright on this specific part. Before coming in with a little bit more white scar, just to tidy up the actual like blue lightning components and make it a bit brighter, stand out. Now for a cigar, we're going to go ahead and use a little bit of Gryph-hound Orange contrast on it. It just fills in the recesses nice. Make sure to get a little bit on the actual cigar butt, as it'll show off just like a little bit of glow. Now for his eyes, we're going to use Evil Sun Scarlet for the intact eye, and then Pallid Witch Flesh for the eye that's a bit destroyed and in the middle of that scar. To highlight our red eye, then going to come in with a Fire Dragon Bright, as well as to highlight the end of our cigar. Just make sure you water down your paints a good bit before you do this. And to finish our weathering for our model, going to come in with a Citadel Rhinox Hide with a dry brush, hit the lower about 20% of the model, just make sure to get a lot of nice grime in there. Before doing pretty similar thing with Doombull Brown, hit a little bit more sparingly than the Rhinox Hide, just go up and over the top, just create a little bit of texture and a little bit more wear. An actual miracle product, this Dirty Dawn Rust stuff is great. A little bit harder to find, but honestly, it's super easy to use, gives a great result. Basically, just shake it up really nicely, get a little bit on your brush with a little bit of water, and then just kind of dab it into the areas, and it's going to create a nice, realistic-looking rust effect, and it takes basically no time at all. The hardest bit is going to be to find it. And with that, our model is complete. Here we have a Bad Moon's War Boss in Mega Armor. I think he looks absolutely fantastic. For a 4-hour paint job, you'd expect this to look a lot worse, I feel like. Once again, with these videos, anybody should be able to replicate these. And at the end of the day, if you can't do it right away exactly like this, no worries, just keep working at it. And as always, I want to say thank you to everybody for watching, and I hope everybody has a great day.